An alleged murder in Amish Country. This man is now accused of killing a woman and leaving her body in a home, reportedly with her goat inside. The suspect just made a court appearance and our cameras were there. He's now facing a charge of murder. And we have the 911 call from the day his housemate said he made a gruesome discovery.
Does she have a pulse or anything?
Pulse?
Yeah, is she breathing?
No, she's dead.
What that call tells us about what may have happened inside a home in a rural, secluded Amish community. Many of its members sat in court as the suspect faced a judge. And I'll tell you why some think this unique case may not be a slam dunk for the prosecution. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. You don't often hear cases like the one I'm talking about today, because this case is an alleged murder that happened in an Amish community. We were in court for a preliminary hearing for Samuel Hochstetler. The 18-year-old is accused of killing 28-year-old Rosanna Kinsinger on March 13th of this year. He wasn't charged with murder until May 5th, and he reportedly continued to live in the Amish community where this happened. Kinsinger was also a member of that Amish community. Before we get into the details of this case and what the local sheriff's office is alleging, let me set the scene for you about where all of this is taking place. This is video from Meigs County, Ohio. This is a rural county. It's about an hour, 45 minutes south of Columbus. It's not that far from the West Virginia border. We shot this video ahead of Hochstetler's court appearance, and you can see just how many members of his community came to see him in court. Ohio has a large Amish population. Experts believe it to be around 85,000 people. The only state with a larger one is Pennsylvania. The Amish are a Christian group. They're known for their plain clothing, very simple lifestyles. Many rely on farming to support themselves, their families, and their communities. We'll talk more about some of the potential challenges in this case because it happened in an Amish community that both the prosecution and defense could face as this case moves forward. Police say the alleged murder happened at a home along this road in Rutland, Ohio. And you can see from this Google Maps image, there is not much surrounding the address that we have from local authorities. Here's the 911 call from March 13th when Kinsinger's body was found.
Meigs County 911.
And we got a death out here.
The voice you hear on that call, we believe is a man that Hochstetler was living with for months leading up to Kinsinger's death. His name is Mose Troyer.
And what was your name?
My name is Mose Troyer. The one that's dead is Rosanna Kinsinger. She's just found in a bed like that, so we don't know.
She's dead?
Huh?
She's dead?
She's dead.
Okay, what was your name again?
My name is Mose Troyer. So we were thinking we need a coroner out here, so I guess you know how to do that.
Okay, and what was her name?
Her name is Rosanna Kinsinger. Rosanna Kinsinger.
How old is she, do you know?
Not exactly, but she's still in her 20s, I think.
Does she have a pulse or anything?
Pulse?
Yeah, is she breathing?
No, she's dead.
Okay.
She seems to be already stiff, so I think she's been dead early this morning or last night, and we didn't find it out.
Okay. So you think she died last night or this morning?
Yeah. That's our guess.
So she's stiff?
Yeah.
Okay. And you just found her?
Yeah.
Okay.
Will they send a coroner out, or how will this be done?
We'll send them out to you. So you don't want to do CPR or anything?
I don't think so. I don't think it's any use for that.
Okay.
You know, we just need whatever's law or need to be done. You know, we just need some help, I guess.
Okay. Alrighty.
Deputies were then dispatched to the home along the rural road and they found Kinsinger dead. Troyer told WSAZ-TV, which is out of West Virginia, that Kinsinger's goat was in the home when he went to go check it out. Deputies say that Kinsinger's death from the beginning was suspicious, but the initial autopsy returned inconclusive results when it came to the cause of death. It took weeks for law enforcement to land on Hochstetler as the suspect. The Meigs County Sheriff said they served search warrants, they interviewed people who might be connected to the case. In that WSAZ report, the 911 caller, Troyer, said that people had noticed that day that Kinsinger hadn't been seen. And so members of the community went to her home to see if she was okay, and that's when they discovered her body. Then he calls 911, and then deputies arrived. Deputies did interview Hochstetler on May 6th, several weeks after the body of Kinsinger was found. And as you can see in this court document, the state of Ohio charged the 18-year-old Amish man with murder. According to local media in Ohio, Hochstetler confessed to having sex with Kinsinger and allegedly told deputies that he put a blanket over her head, and when they finished, he realized she was not alive. At his most recent court appearance, a preliminary hearing, we saw Samuel Hochstetler in an orange jumpsuit, in handcuffs, far different from that traditional Amish clothing that he was wearing in his booking photo. And an interesting part of that hearing was the judge offering Hochstetler an interpreter for Pennsylvania Dutch. That language goes back to the 18th century. According to a post that we found on the University of Wisconsin's website, it was originally developed in rural parts of Pennsylvania, and it is a common language that is spoken by members of the Amish community today, Hochstetler apparently included.
I was advised potentially that in addition to English, you spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. Okay, so I made arrangements to have an interpreter join us here today for this hearing. Do you feel that you can proceed here today in English, or do you wish Mr. Beachy to be here to interpret for you in Pennsylvania Dutch?
I think I could do it in English, but it might be easier for Pennsylvania Dutch.
Okay. Do you wish him to remain here on the line with us?
If it's not too hard, maybe that's...
Okay, well, we've got him here, so we'll use him, okay? All right.
Hochstetler was soft-spoken in court, as you just heard there, but he did say some things might be easier to understand in court if he was told them in Pennsylvania Dutch.
Mr. Hochstetler, you understand what you're charged with, correct? Okay, and you met with your attorney before coming here to the courtroom, correct?
Out there, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. And you understand you have a right to a preliminary hearing this afternoon, and further, you understand that I have in front of me what appears to be a waiver of that right here this afternoon, correct?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to ask you here in open court, sir. Is that your signature on the waiver?
I can't really read it, but I'm pretty sure if it's the paper you have it.
Okay, well, I want you to look at it and just confirm that you did sign that document, okay?
Is that your signature?
Okay, thank you, Trent. Thank you, sir. All right, so Mr. Hochstetler, based upon the fact that you've had the chance to talk to counsel here this afternoon, I'm going to make a finding that with full knowledge of your rights and voluntarily here today, you are waiving your right to this preliminary hearing. Do you understand that?
Yes.
All right. Furthermore, your case is going to be bound over here to the common pleas court for further consideration by its grand jury. Do you understand that?
I'm not sure, but...
Okay. So what's going to happen is your case is going to be bound over to this court, to the common pleas court, where your case can go to grand jury to be considered for indictment, or it can proceed directly in front of Judge Warner. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. James, do you desire any further inquiry regarding Mr. Hochstetler?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right. Trent, do you desire any further inquiry of your client?
Nothing further, Your Honor, thank you, sir.
All right. The bond is previously set at $1 million, shall continue. Anything else, James, on behalf of the state of Ohio?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor, thank you.
Trent, anything more on behalf of your client?
Nothing further, Judge, thank you.
Mr. Hochstetler, we're all done here this afternoon. Thank you for being here.
That was the end of the court proceedings, but our cameras kept rolling as Hochstetler left the courtroom. And as he did that, he looked back at these several members of the Amish community that were in the gallery. And remember, Kinsinger was a member of this community as well. Take a look at this video as he walks out. Look at his face. You can see the tears rolling down his face as he wipes them as he heads out the door and back to the county jail. As far as what we know about Hochstetler beyond the fact that he's a member of the Amish community, according to that WSAZ story who spoke to the 911 caller Moyer, Hochstetler moved to this Amish community in southern Ohio from Kentucky in recent months, and he continued to live in the community where that alleged murder happened until his arrest in May. We don't have a picture of 28-year-old Rosanna Kinsinger. As a member of the Amish community, it's perhaps likely we'll never know what she looked like. But this is what the local sheriff said about her when he announced the arrest of her alleged killer. Quote, "This case was such a tragedy to those who knew Rosanna. She was a beloved individual in her community. Detectives have worked around the clock searching for answers and were able to get those answers. Hopefully this investigation helps bring some closure to the victim's family, and on behalf of the sheriff's office, we offer our deepest condolences." Joining us now from Ohio to talk more this case is criminal defense attorney Diane Menashe. Thanks for being with us here on Law and Crime. How unique is it to have a case, a criminal case like this in the Amish community?
Unique. I know we were talking beforehand, and I had a sex offense case some years ago in Guernsey County, but as we sort of all know about the Amish community is they're very insular. And then also there's this other component of one of their tenets is to forgive and forget. So truly, if individuals in the community do learn or know of potential criminal conduct within their community, upon a confession, there is the tenet that they should forgive and forget. So makes for not a whole lot of reporting externally of criminal offenses within that community.
Yeah, what challenges, I mean, to your point, I mean, what challenges from, if you're a prosecutor in this case, you're trying to get witnesses, you're trying to get people to help build your case. I mean, what are some of the challenges? The fact that this happened in an Amish community and they're trying to figure out, how they can convict from the prosecution standpoint the suspect.
Well, I think first of all, we've got a language barrier, right? We know that even the individuals that's charged, his native language is Pennsylvania Dutch. And I would assume that's true of much of that community, as is true of the Amish communities across Ohio. So you've got the language issue, and then you've just got this cultural trust issue, right? The Amish community is as we just said, is very, insulated. They don't use cars, they don't have electricity. And so there is just kind of a disconnect as to how sort of the rest of the world lives, if you will, versus their community. And therefore, when law enforcement comes in with their cruisers and their lights and their electronics, I think there's a real cultural divide there that will make it very difficult for the police to investigate this.
I imagine too, because definitely from the prosecution standpoint, when you're trying to figure out and build your case, but even from the defense standpoint, I mean, you're a criminal defense attorney. I mean, what are some of the challenges that a defense attorney might run into? Because I assume that the suspect has never needed to deal with an attorney before.
And 100%, when I did the case that I mentioned, it was, we went to the community to do field interviews, and we had to really spend a significant amount of time, 3 or 4 trips just to meet the individuals before we could, start doing our investigative efforts. So, and I was on, the individual side, if you will. So, yeah, I think it's really difficult. There's a lot of trust building that you've got to gain, and which isn't necessarily true in mainstream America.
And even for you as a defense attorney, I mean, how in Ohio, and I know Pennsylvania, places like Lancaster, another place where there's a large Amish community, but like how available is a translator in Pennsylvania Dutch?
You'd be surprised about that. I think, because you could certainly, there's dialects, right? I think you would be surprised about that. But where I think that interpreter issue comes into play is that it sounds as if sort of the main piece of evidence they have against the individual that's been charged is his statement. And it sounds as if there wasn't an interpreter there when he made a statement. So I presume that could lead to suppression issues down the road as to whether that statement was knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. But that's yet to come. But it seems like an issue that will rear its head.
And when you look at this indictment, I know that initially the cause of death, it was suspicious, but it was inconclusive. And then now, there's a statement that apparently he says they were having sex, and then this woman ends up dying. What stands out to you about kind of the headline pieces of evidence that'll be at the center of this case?
Checked the Meigs County Common Pleas Court docket this morning, and it looks as if he's only been indicted on one single count, which is murder. And they indicted him under the A subsection, which is that he purposely caused the death. And what was interesting is the absence of any other alleged sex offenses in the indictment. There's no rape, sexual battery, nothing. And so one would in the implication is that then the state's theory is that the sex was consensual, but at some point during the sexual, situation, that he then purposely caused her death. But I have to tell you, after I read the media and I checked the indictment, I was really surprised not to see any charged sex offenses.
Yeah, because I imagine, and you're the attorney, I'm not, but would that open the door if you're a defense attorney for this suspect, and clearly there's no surveillance cameras inside the house, that, well, they were having consensual sex, and then you could argue that it was an accident.
Well, right. And actually the subsection, there's another subsection in Ohio under the murder statute that if you're essentially committing a felony and the person dies, as long as it's the proximate cause, you could be found guilty of murder. And so I say that because it's almost an easier way to prove murder, and they didn't charge him under that subsection. So really interesting, again, that they've just charged him with purposely caused the death. And to your point, there's not going to be any surveillance. And even it sounds like this was, this is a delayed indicted case. I mean, 2 months went by, right, before they even charged him and questioned him. So there's certainly probably a spoliation of evidence issue there as well.
Are you surprised that it took so long I'm always fascinated when a death can be inconclusive, and for then it to be, apparently, again, they were having sex and then something happened and then she winds up dead. But just in your experience, for it to take so long to figure out how somebody died?
Well, it makes it a tribal case, doesn't it? Like, how do they do an autopsy? It's inconclusive. Of course, we know from an autopsy, they're looking at things like, is force, cause of death, any type of trauma that would include, not just head, but all over the body, including vaginal. And they said it was inconclusive. And then it seems as if, based on the reporting and the media that I've seen, there's no DNA, there's no forensics. They just have his statement. And again, I think that will be interesting how that cultural piece, when they questioned him, if there was an interpreter there, etc., like how that statement, the efforts to suppress that statement, and then what will remain without it if they can't get it suppressed.
Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse, but I assume in the Amish community, I mean, the idea of like Miranda rights and what to say, what not to say, that's something that they really don't know. Does the law in any way look at a community like this? And there are similar communities, I think, just very insulated communities of people that are not part of I don't know if mainstream society is like a fair word, but like, the Amish community, to your point, they're very insulated. Does the law see them any differently than they might if this case had happened in Columbus?
Well, the Supreme Court has certainly weighed in on what is a knowing, intelligent, and voluntary waiver of your rights. And one of the things to take into account is, someone's prior existing interaction with police, or their IQ, or their knowledge as to how the system might work. And I know when we were talking about that technology piece, but let's imagine the Amish don't have TV. They don't have interaction with police. So to your point, not only do they not know about Miranda, they don't know what an inside of a police department looks like, being in a cruiser, being in a car for the first time. I mean, those are all types of things going to the station that I certainly believe will be taken into account, assuming that there's a motion to suppress forthcoming.
And I know we have a 911 call that was made by, I believe it was the roommate of the suspect. So he knew how to use a phone. And I think people who, you live in Ohio, I went to school in Pennsylvania, I think people think that they're maybe less attached to technology than maybe we realize. Like they know how to use phones in many cases. But as far as kind of building up this case, what are some of the challenges, even if you're a defense attorney and you're trying to figure out how you have witnesses that might be able to testify with you to kind of get past some of those cultural differences?
Yeah, I think first of all, just, the defense attorney that's been appointed on this case is going to really have to come to understand, if they don't currently, that cultural piece, right? And then understand, to your point, the technology and how that community was operating, the access that he had or didn't have to her. And then I think it's going to be, as it always is, right, is keeping the state to their burden of proof, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In the absence of forensics and eyewitness and inconclusive autopsy and maybe a suppressed statement, this could be a case that, that could well be very difficult for the state of Ohio to prove and meet their burden of proof.
And he gives this, apparently he gave a statement saying what happened, and then that's really kind of a key piece. What, just from your experience, are the conversations like with someone who's Amish, trying to get them to understand, like maybe if there's a plea that's put forward by the state of Ohio to get them to understand like what's happening when, they maybe have never been in a car, and then now they're looking at spending, he potentially could spend the rest of his life in a prison.
Right. And I know the bail is such right now at $1 million that he's locally incarcerated. I think one of the things that I did when I did this case is involve the elders. As you know, Chris, the individual that's been charged is just 18 years of age. So I certainly think part of that trust and building that relationship will not just be to have an interpreter, but to engage a trusted elder or someone within the community that you can use sort of as a liaison, if you will, because there are cultural differences. And while there's attorney-client privilege, you first got to build that trust up with the client. And that's also going to come with some education to your part. The laws in Ohio, or what does purpose mean? Those aren't things that someone that is 18 and Amish would most likely understand.
Just take us in, as you live in Ohio, you've been to this county where this case is taking place. Just kind of take us inside what these communities are like for people who have never been around an Amish community.
Well, Meigs County is a very rural county. When you think rural Midwest, that's Meigs County. Very lower class type county. And with respect to the Amish, I know we were joking before we jumped on, but when you're in Meigs County, you're oftentimes on, every road, sort of a country road. The buggies are in front of you, you can't pass. So, when you live in those counties, you're very familiar with the surrounding Amish communities. And I will just tell you that there isn't a whole lot of intersection between, as we've been saying, sort of this mainstream America and the Amish. But they do have food stands along the roadside, et cetera, that cars can stop at. But really, otherwise, there is very little interaction. I think just for those that live on the coast and aren't familiar with living amongst, the Amish, it is unique for sure.
Yeah, you have experience, but also when you think of some of the people who are prosecutors, just the legal system, knowing that there is a pretty large Amish community in Ohio, how, for as unique as a case as this appears to be, at the same time, what type of experience do prosecutors typically have with the Amish and just kind of understanding what they may run into in a case like this? Or are there experts that you can hire who somehow have an understanding of the Amish community that could help either a defense or a prosecution?
I have to tell you, this case is getting so much attention because it is the Amish piece, right? And so I think that does go to show that as much as, these counties have a significant Amish population, we just don't see criminal charges against those in that community often. So I think even the prosecutors don't have a very good sense of how those communities work and the cultural divides. And also there's this forgive and forget principle, a tenet. I don't think we can forget that because they truly adhere to that. So that's very interesting. If someone knows that something's been done and someone owns that action, if you will, then the listener is supposed to truly forgive and forget, which would make difficult for witnesses. And I know that became a very interesting issue in the case I had.
And in the case you had, just to kind of dive into that for a second, because of that forgive and forget part, and I just imagine sometimes even for tough cases that there may be cases that'll happen, crimes that'll happen in the Amish community that maybe police on the outside don't really hear about. How did you learn of this case and this crime, this alleged crime? I'm not sure how the case ended, but just knowing that something had happened in the Amish community, because there's a lot of times we don't know what happens inside an Amish community.
100%. And in the case that I had, it was unique because my client was working at a farm stand that was outside the community. The instance was being spoken of, and someone that was not in the community overheard it and reported it. So very unique situation. And it was, a delayed case by many, many years. And that's where the forgive and forget really came to be, sort of key in the case that I had. Ultimately, that was a good resolution in the case I had, but I really think these Amish cases present a real issue. And so we'll see how it works out. But just charging him with murder is pretty interesting, to say the least, particularly since he said that they were having sex and there's no sex crimes associated with the murder count.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case. I mean, to your point, it's headline news. We're talking about it because of the Amish part of it, because that makes it unique. But in terms of a murder case, it does seem that it would be, a story that would be followed as well, because it's so unclear what happened. Where do you see this going from here? Now that he's behind bars, bail's been set, what could happen next?
I think his defense attorney is obviously going to look at the competency piece, right? Just understanding his age, and we need to the defense attorney will need to understand, his education, his IQ, his ability to be competent and assist in his defense. And then I assume also they're going to be looking at that suppression issue first and foremost, and see if there's any way to suppress that statement. And if the statement is potentially, suppressed, then is there a corpus delicti issue? Is there any other evidence that the state has? And if not, then the case would obviously have to be dismissed. But again, in all the media I've read, I don't see eyewitnesses or individuals saying anything nefarious about their relationship. It's just his statement to the police.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case. We're going to see how this continues to play out. Diane Menashe, thank you so much for joining us, not just from the legal perspective, but your expertise in dealing with cases involving the Amish community. Thanks for coming on Law and Crime.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.